What's the weirdest thing you've seen happen at a friend's house that they thought was normal? Story 1. When I was in high school, a friend invited me and two other friends over for dinner at his house. His mom served homemade bean soup, which was really good. Toward the end of the main course, she brought out chocolate cake for dessert. She cut each of us a slice and put it right into our bowls, which still had about an inch of soup in them. We exchanged puzzled glances, but since the family dug right in, it seemed like chocolate cake soaked in bean soup was normal for them. Story 2. This happened when I was around 6. I needed to use the bathroom at a friend's house, and he led me to his parents' bathroom. The place was filled with stuff, boxes, magazines, even an inflatable pool. You could barely get in there. He pulled out a drawer from a cabinet by the entryway and said to pee in there. I thought he was joking until he did it himself. I couldn't argue with that, so I did the same. Then he shut the drawer, and we went back to playing Ninja Turtles. I have no idea what happened to that drawer or the house. Story 3. His mom was walking around the house, giving out a list of chores while we were doing homework at the coffee table. She was a single mom, working multiple jobs. My friend and his siblings didn't even react, but the moment she saw me, a new face, sitting there in shock, she quickly ducked into another room, put on her shirt, and came out with a carton of Oreos from a secret stash. She was pretty silent after that, probably worried I'd tell my parents. But honestly, we just cared about getting some cookies. Story 4. One of the first times I met my husband's family, I was invited to their house. My husband gestured for me to sit down and make myself comfortable. The house was very cluttered, not quite like a hoarder's, but close. They had a couple of couches facing each other, along with some other chairs. Not knowing the rules, I sat on one of the couches, which had a lot of stuffed teddy bears on it. There were probably 30 small to medium-sized stuffed bears on this couch. My husband's mom and brother both visibly reacted, as if I had damaged the bears. That's when I was told that the couch was for the bears only, and no one was allowed to sit on it. Each bear even had a beaded necklace with its name on it to tell them apart, because they were all the same brand and style. Story 5. I went to a friend's house when I was a kid. We were sitting at the dining table for lunch when the house phone rang. Suddenly everyone, including the mom and dad, dropped to the floor, leaving me sitting there confused. The dad then told me that I had to answer the phone. So I picked it up and said, "Hello, Johnson's house." I handed the phone to the dad and everyone laughed. I was so uncomfortable. The next time the phone rang, I was the first to hit the floor, trying to fit in with this fun, loving family. I loved going over there. Story 6. When I was younger, my dad passed away, and my mom remarried and had 2 kids. I was moved into the basement, which was unfinished. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was only 10. My space was separated by a sheet from the laundry area. The basement had concrete walls, exposed wood beams, and cement flooring. I had a heater and a dehumidifier because it was cold and damp. When I used the heater, my parents would put up the sheet around my bed to heat the space faster. My friends weren't allowed over, and my siblings couldn't go into my room either. During family gatherings, I was told to go to the guest room instead of staying in my room while guests were there. I didn't think anything was strange, even though my siblings had fully furnished bedrooms with TVs and I was in the basement with sheets for walls and bathroom mats on the floor. I only realized how unusual it was when I was older. It turns out, the family vacations that I wasn't allowed to go on were paid for with the money I received from my dad's passing. When I found out, it messed me up a bit. But my siblings always defended my parents, saying we were raised well. Story 7. When I was younger, I was best friends with 2 brothers from Jamaica. One day, they invited me over to play Atari after we finished playing outside. We came home a few minutes after curfew, and their dad, who was calm at first, told us to sit in the living room. I sat there with my friends, and they were super quiet, which was weird. Then their dad walked in with a belt and disciplined them. I was so nervous because I thought I was next, but he didn't touch me. Afterward, he asked if I'd like some carrot juice, while my friends set up the Atari like nothing had happened. I sat there in shock, wondering what had just gone down. Story 8. I used to babysit for a family occasionally, and the kids would always ask for a cool cup. They asked for it constantly, but were too young to explain what it was. I finally mentioned it to their mom, and she started laughing. She cut the tops off some bell peppers, took out the seeds, and filled them with tap water. The kids went nuts over these cool cups like they were treats. It was really odd to me that drinking water out of bell peppers was such a big deal to them. Story 9. I celebrated Christmas with my high school girlfriend's family one year. When it was her mother's turn to open her presents, she unwrapped gifts from each of her daughters and finally one from her husband. Then her husband started pulling tiny hidden gifts from everywhere. Earrings from the couch cushions, necklaces, bracelets, candy, flowers, you name it. He must have had a dozen presents hidden all over the house. He had the biggest grin on his face the entire time. When he was done, he wished her a Merry Christmas, told her he loved her, and gave her a kiss in front of everyone. It was a wonderful moment, but it felt a bit strange to me. That display of affection made me realize I had never once seen my own parents show each other any kind of affection. I had never heard them say, "I love you" to one another. That's when it dawned on me. It was my family that was different. That experience taught me that being romantic and showing love is not only normal, but also admirable. Her parents were amazing people, and I'll always look up to them as role models. I hope they're still doing well. Story 10. My friend's dad convinced all the kids that the end piece of every loaf of bread was the best part. He also made a house rule that while hitting was forbidden, placing your hand on your sibling's shoulder and punching your own hand was acceptable. One time it was Noel's turn to get the end piece of the next loaf of bread, but when groceries came in, Tony took it instead. Noel was furious, but instead of hitting his brother, he followed the rule, putting his hand on Tony's shoulder and punching his own hand. Their dad also had a quirky hobby, collecting pipe organs. He had several electric and electronic consoles. At one point, I went on a trip across the country to help disassemble a full pipe organ and bring it back. They later rebuilt the organ inside a geodesic dome, so when you walked into their house, it was like living inside a musical instrument, with pipes on the walls and a console in the living room. Story 11. When I was in 6th grade, I went to a friend's house after school. We arrived at her apartment around 3 p.m. and found her mom half-dressed, passed out with her head on the floor, one arm twisted on the coffee table, and her legs on the couch. The TV was blaring, and she didn't even notice we were there. I had no experience with anything like this, and although my friend was clearly embarrassed, I didn't really understand the full implications of what was happening. I just thought it was an odd place for a nap. Later, I casually mentioned it to my parents, asking if they'd ever let me nap on the couch and watch TV too. Bless my parents for understanding the situation immediately but not making a big deal of it or embarrassing my friend. That was the last time I stayed at her house, though. After that, all our sleepovers were at my place, but I didn't realize the change for a couple of years. Looking back, I think my friend appreciated it. We're still friends today, and she's doing great. She's even a doctor. Unfortunately, her mom still struggles with the same issues, but my friend has really thrived despite it all. Story 12. Not at my friend's house, but we were 15-year-olds and went for a walk to her mom's friend's house to get her some cigarettes. We walked into the house, and the 2-year-old was covering themselves in margarine. The floor was covered in cockroaches, animal waste, used diapers, and trash. There was peanut butter on the walls and kitchen table. It was incredibly sad to see kids living in such dirty and disheveled conditions. The strangest part was seeing the toddlers smearing margarine in their hair, and no one caring. The rest was gross, but I'd seen that kind of living before. However, the total indifference toward a baby was something I'd never experienced. Story 13. Here's an I Was That Family story. My godmother, who was practically an aunt, ran a fairly successful daycare out of her home in the 90s. She was a first-generation immigrant to the U.S., whose parents came to the New England area from Ireland. My 2 younger brothers and I spent a lot of time at her home, and I was generally the oldest child there. When I was about 8 years old, she started having me make her favorite drink, gin and tonic. She drank these all day while running her home daycare. By age 8, I knew how to mix cocktails, that forks were better for stirring than spoons, and that large plastic bottles of gin were cheap and low quality. This went on for years, almost daily, until my family moved out west. My godmother kept her daycare running until she passed away, likely from health problems related to alcohol. I was 15 when she passed, and I'm in my 30s now. I honestly went most of my life thinking nothing of it until I became a father a couple of years ago. At that point, I thought, how did anyone let her run a daycare? Side note, I drink, but would consider myself a moderate drinker. That being said, I could never stomach the thought of gin and didn't try it until I was 30. This was because I once licked my finger early in my daycare bartending career. After a couple of drops of gin splashed on my hand, that low-quality gin was the worst thing I'd ever tasted, and I couldn't understand how my godmother enjoyed it so much. Story 14. My family was very comfortable, and my mom always babysat a lot of kids from around the neighborhood. Basically, her place was just where the kids hung out. Once, there was an emergency with my dad, and my mom really needed someone to watch me overnight. I ended up staying with one of the families she babysat for. They were really nice people, and I was close friends with their kids because they were at my house every day. It was a new experience, though. Yes. This was the first time I'd ever seen people living in real poverty. I was kind about it and didn't say anything, but parts of it were a real shock to me. The toilet didn't work, but they had continued to use it to the point that it was piled up to the seat. We had to unscrew the light bulb to turn off the lights because the switch would shock you if you touched it. I felt really bad for them. It was a real eye-opener for me as a kid, and it gave me a much better understanding of why my mom babysat and fed all those kids. Story 15. When I was in about first grade, my best friend at the time had a lot of temper tantrums. We were having a sleepover, and I fell asleep in her bedroom. In the middle of the night, I woke up in a different bed with her father. I was so confused, but he explained that she had a temper tantrum, and her mom went to sleep in her bed with her, so they moved me to the guest room. I was young and didn't understand that it wasn't normal for him to sleep in the same bed as me. I told my parents when I went home the next day, and they were extremely concerned, asking me if he touched me, etc. I was very confused because my pure innocent mind didn't understand that concept. Now, as an adult, I think, why didn't they just move me to the other room? Why did the dad have to get in bed with me? They were truly good people, and nothing happened. But it was still strange. Story 16. There was this eccentric lady who was our neighbor when I was a kid. We lived in a small town that still had party lines, even in the early 90s. And unfortunately for us, we were on her party line. She was rude and always hogged the phone. Anytime she'd be on a call, which was often, and you tried to pick up the phone, she'd yell at you to hang up. Yet if you were on the phone and she wanted to use it, she'd interrupt your conversation and demand you hang up so she could use it. I never understood why we tolerated it. Her son was in my class at school. She was also very strict about her religious beliefs and didn't believe children should have toys. They could only play outside, never inside. Because of that, her son would always come over to our house to play. And of course, we never told on him. His mom was not just rude on the phone, but also in person. You could tell just by entering her house. She was a very unpleasant and unhappy person, and I honestly cannot remember a single kind word she ever said to anyone. No one liked her at all. Story 17. My friend invited me for a sleepover, and the next morning we were eating and talking with her mom. Her mom asked if she wanted to prank her dad again, and my friend was all, yes, he was so mad. I thought they might have done something harmless, like swapping shampoo with something else, so I hesitantly asked what they did last time. It turned out they had tied a string around his waist while he was passed out from pain medication, then woke him up by tying the string to the bedroom doorknob and slamming the door. My friend was a 9-year-old girl, and her mom got her involved in that. Doing it at all was wrong, but involving a kid? They assured me they messed with him like that all the time, and it was fine. I quickly decided to never stay over again because I did not want to know what other strange pranks they might pull, or what else I might accidentally witness. Story 18. Back in high school, I had a friend whose mom seemed super laid back. She would let us come over to smoke, drink, and hang out. At one point, though, things got really awkward when one of the other guys in our friend group started dating the friend's mom. The guy who was involved with our friend's mom started acting really aggressive and began bossing the kid around just because of the situation. It was definitely strange, but no one did anything about it. The other friends in the group would tease the mom's son about it, but that's as far as it went. Story 19. I invited a few people over for my 10th birthday party, and the plan was a sleepover with video games and board games. It sounded great to my nerdy friends and me. The day of the party came, and one of my friends got dropped off by the school bus with me. We walked inside, and there was no pizza yet, and the cake hadn't been picked up. I asked my dad, and he started yelling that my mom would pick them up on her way from work. She wouldn't be home until 7 p.m. at the earliest, and my friends were arriving around 4 p.m. After my friend and I left the room, he, let's call him Mark, not his real name, asked me if something was wrong and why my dad was so mad. It was normal for him to be that angry when he forgot something. The rest of my friends arrived around 4 p.m. Friends Bill, Bob, and Frank, not their real names. I offered them fruit snacks and told them the pizza should arrive around 7:30 p.m. We were taking turns playing Gran Turismo 4 when Bill asked if my parents were home because he wanted to meet them. I told him my dad was home but was sleeping since he gets up really early, which was a lie. He was taking his medicine, which I later found out was heroin, and would be occupied for a while. I also said my mom would be home around 7 p.m., which was true. The lie seemed to work, and we continued playing games. 8 p.m. rolled around, and my mom got home, but she didn't have any pizza or cake. I greeted her when she came into the living room. She asked if we had already eaten the pizza and cake, and I told her that Dad said she'd be picking them up. She asked where my dad was, and I told her he was in their bedroom. She said she'd be right back and went to their room. It wasn't long before we could clearly hear them yelling at each other. I noticed the arguing was making my friends uncomfortable, but I was unfazed. It was at that moment that I realized what was happening in my home wasn't normal. I felt awful. I told my friends my parents would likely be arguing most of the night, and if they wanted to go home, I'd understand. They all wanted to go home. Because of the layout of the house, the kitchen was closer to the bedrooms than the living room, and that's where the phone was. So I went with each of my friends to the kitchen so they could call their parents to pick them up. The front door was even closer, so they left quickly. Each friend took turns calling their parents, and I had to talk to Frank's parents for him since he was too shaken by what was happening. All the parents arrived within an hour to pick up their kids. Mark was the last to be picked up, and he asked if I wanted to hang out at his place for the night. I told him that if my parents found out I left without telling anyone, especially if I didn't leave a note, they'd be even angrier. I also explained that I couldn't leave a note saying where I was going because I didn't want his family to get dragged into it. We hugged, and he left. My parents stopped yelling around 11 p.m. when my dad left, shouting about going to his friend's place for the weekend. I was reading a book in the living room when my mom walked in and saw that everything was put away and all my friends were gone. She asked where they went, and I'll never forget the pain in her eyes when I told her that they each called their parents and went home. For the longest time, I thought all of this was normal. I thought everyone's parents argued endlessly. I thought everyone had a parent they had to lie for. I thought everyone's parents lied to them constantly. I thought it was normal for parents to get angry at their kids for no reason. I thought everyone always looked for exits upon entering a new place. I thought everyone knew how to act without being noticed. I thought everyone knew how to act under pressure. I haven't celebrated a birthday since then. I don't even try. I feel no motivation to celebrate, as it only reminds me of that time and other awful things that happened around then. I'm still friends with Mark to this day. He's one of my only friends, and by far my closest one. Story 20. I went to a sleepover at this girl's house, and her mom was obsessively taking pictures of us all night. At one point, we were watching a movie, and my friend passed out. Her mom, I kid you not, pulled out a huge newscast-type heavy-duty camera and started recording her daughter sleeping for a solid 5 minutes. I have trouble sleeping, so that night when we kids went to the bedroom to sleep, I was on the floor, just staring at the wall in the dark. I was facing away from the door, lying on my side. I heard the door creak, then footsteps, and suddenly the room lit up with a flash. I got up just in time to see the door close. I know it was her mom taking pictures of us. The weirdest part to me was that it happened at about 3 a.m., meaning the girl's mom either had an alarm set or just stayed up that late waiting. Story 21. Scene, small southern town. When I was around 10, 12 years old, a friend hosted a big sleepover for our group. There were probably 12, 15 of us, mostly jock preppy types, future frat boys, upper middle class kids with a few rich ones mixed in. The host was the stepson of a chiropractor, and his mom had a certain reputation before we even knew what that meant in the early 90s. Anyway, we started to arrive, messing around and planning some mischief for the night. The host assured us we could do whatever we wanted because his mom and stepdad were going on a nighttime bike ride. Well, that's not what happened at all. The parents came out dressed in full leather gear. The stepdad didn't have his helmet fully on, but the mom was being led by a leash right in front of us. He said a few words, told us to behave, and then led her to the car and drove off. After a moment of stunned silence, we had a big group discussion about what we had just seen. The host, who thought it was perfectly normal, told us it was just a biking thing. We didn't know everything, but we knew enough to be skeptical of that explanation. Still, about half an hour later, we put it behind us and went on with playing night games outside like nothing had happened. Story 22. Growing up in rural East England, I had a friend who lived on a working farm. They had the stereotypical big English farmhouse, a lovely old place with no flat floors or straight walls anywhere. Downstairs, the layout was quite interesting. They had a room that was almost hidden away, one you could easily miss unless you knew it was there or noticed it from outside. This room, which I only went into once or twice in many years of friendship, was their Christmas room. It had decorations up all year round. Whenever they bought presents during the year, they'd wrap them and just leave them in the room until Christmas. It was amazing, really. A whole room dedicated to Christmas. Often when Christmas came around, they'd forgotten what some of the gifts were that they had bought for family members, which added an element of surprise. Story 23. When I was 15, I participated in a nature program over the summer. I became friends with one of the girls there, and we hit it off really well. When we found out we lived near each other, she invited me over for a sleepover. Her family seemed nice and everything was fine until later on. I needed to use the bathroom, so I asked where it was. Her mom mentioned they were having some trouble with the toilet. I didn't think much of it until I went in and saw the toilet. It didn't work at all. They just had a plastic bag in it. There was so much waste, including used pads, and it was just sitting there for everyone to see. I almost gagged. I don't know how long they had kept the bag there, but the smell was terrible. The worst part was that everyone in the house acted like it was completely normal. To this day, I never found out if it ever got fixed. Story 24. Does the most horrifically filthy place you've ever seen count as weird? A friend I'd known since middle school invited me to visit him about 6 years after we graduated. He was living with someone, and they had a child. They all lived in a small 2-bedroom place. As soon as I arrived, the smell hit me at the door. The carpet was once shag, but had been matted down into grime. The kitchen had a sheet over the doorway, and when I walked in, I couldn't believe my eyes. Every surface was covered with dishes, boxes, and old food. Everything was buried under thick, green, fuzzy mold. The sink had standing water with a layer of mold covering it. I was in there for about 4 seconds before I left. I made the mistake of asking to use the restroom. The sink, tub, and toilet were all black. The sink was stained from hair dye, and the tub was coated in filth and slime. The toilet looked just as bad. The space between the tub, toilet, and sink was crammed with what had once been towels, but they were now rotting, smelly lumps of horror. There was no way I was going to use that bathroom. Their poor child slept on a mattress on the floor in a nearly empty room with just a sheet and blanket. The hallway outside the child's room had a bare light bulb that was swarming with bugs. Yes, CPS was called about the situation. Story 28. I had a friend who lived on the 3rd floor of an apartment building. Instead of walking his dog like most people, he would lower it over the balcony on a leash and then hoist it back up. The dog had a custom-made body harness and loved every bit of it. Sometimes he would give the dog a little swing, and the dog would spread its legs out like Superman. And yes, the dog would stand by the balcony door when it was ready to go out. This same friend also had a pet robin. He found it injured as a baby and nursed it back to health, eventually letting it go back to the woods behind his apartment. For months, the bird would return to the balcony. With a distinct whistle, he could summon the bird for mealworms. It became his go-to move when impressing dates. Story 29. This was an adult friendship, but I've always thought it was strange. I went over to my then-partner's parents' house while I was getting to know him. His parents lived in a gated golf course community, a big, beautiful retiree house. I made dinner for us and quickly realized they didn't have a trash can inside the house. There was a small recycling bin in the pantry, a good 30 feet away from the stove, fridge, and sink, and 2 giant trash cans out in the garage. I asked him about it, like where was I supposed to put vegetable peels or food packaging? He fetched a grocery bag from the pantry, collected the waste, and then threw it away outside. There were also no trash cans in the bathrooms, which made me glad I didn't visit while I had my period. He said it kept things more sanitary, but all I could think was how much of a hassle it was to haul things out to the garage every time you needed to throw something away. Story 30. My friend's parents lived with the grandparents, and the grandpa had apparently suffered a stroke years ago. They kept him in a recliner in the front room with a steady stream of movies playing on loop. I went over for a sleepover, not knowing this, and not realizing that the only place for me to sleep was the living room. Apparently, Grandpa did not sleep in a bed and stayed in that recliner all night. Grandma would come out of her room periodically to change tapes. He'd grunt really loudly when one was over. All the kids acted like this was completely normal, and the adults made jokes about wishing they could be so lucky. I was around 8 or 9 at the time. They didn't have a phone, so I couldn't call home to be rescued, and I never went to another sleepover again. Story 31. I was sleeping over at a friend's house, and the whole place was a mess. It smelled like the concentrated essence of an ashtray. We went upstairs to make the bed, and there was this storage room with a mattress that had brown stains on it. She said I'd be sleeping on that. I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. She didn't give me any sheets or a pillow either, and there were mouse droppings on the floor. I was so shocked that I didn't say or do anything, but if it happened now, I'd definitely just go home. Another time, this same friend was complaining to me about how her parents didn't clean the kitchen very well. She told me her dad took the blender apart, and there was a lot of gross stuff underneath the cup. A while later, she invited me over for dinner, and I said I wasn't interested. When she asked why, I told her that what she had told me about the kitchen put me off. She was really mad at me, but I was like, "You were the one complaining about it, right? So you agree with me." Story 33. Some girls from my Girl Scout troop invited me over to their house to play. We were probably 8, 10 years old. They were 2 of 10 kids in the house. I was being raised by a single dad, so he was thankful for a little help, and I got to hang out with my friends. First, they told me all about the routines in their house: boy chores, girl chores, chores for the older kids, chores for the younger kids, and how they did homework. They were homeschooled. The weird part was when they asked if I wanted a snack. I love snacks, so I said yes. Their snack was literally an open package of raw ground beef that they each took a handful of to eat. I politely declined and said I wasn't hungry. After I told my dad about that, he never let me go back. Another family from Girl Scouts, who had only 3 kids, invited me over as well. We had a lot of fun playing Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? But for dinner, they served spaghetti and drank milk with it. I was really grossed out by that combination, and I told my dad I didn't want to eat with them again. He said I wasn't allowed to play with them anymore anyway because they lived on a farm and their mom refused to vaccinate them. This was in rural Michigan in the early 90s. Story 34. I stayed at a friend's place for the night when we were 16. His family was a little odd with their mannerisms, but one event stands out more than others. My buddy and I had eaten a lot of pizza, and he ended up feeling really bloated from all the pizza and soda. I was fine, but he started getting bad stomach aches. Next thing I know, he's stuck in the bathroom calling out for his mom. She comes in, and he tells her his stomach hurts. She opens the bathroom door, walks in, and starts rubbing his belly while he's dealing with the effects of being bloated. She's whispering calming words to him while he's letting it all out. His mom made small comments about how brave he was for getting through it, while he sat there groaning and thanking her. This went on for about 10 minutes. I was in the nearby laundry room, just staring into my hands, feeling like I was way too deep in some what the heck moment. When he finished, his mom left, and he walked into the laundry room like nothing happened. So I did what any normal person would. I acted like nothing happened too, because addressing that was way too weird for me. This was probably the strangest family interaction I've ever witnessed. Story 35. When I was a teenager, my friend had a dog that would eat its own waste, and there are other dogs as well. The dog's fur around its mouth was stained brown from all the waste it had eaten. After its little snack, it would run into the house, and their mom would pick up the dog, say something like, "My precious baby," and kiss it on the mouth while the dog licked her lips. I would nearly gag watching this. I mentioned to my friends how weird and gross it was, but neither of them thought anything about it. They and their whole family knew the dog ate waste regularly. One of the brothers even said, "A dog's mouth is cleaner than a human's mouth." Maybe so, but I'm sure that doesn't apply to a dog that just finished dining on poop. To this day, I can't understand how they thought it was normal to kiss that dog on the mouth. Story 36. I was the only Asian kid in my neighborhood in Detroit. A white friend invited me over to his house, and when I arrived, I started to take off my shoes. He said, "What are you doing? Come on in." I stepped inside with my shoes on, which didn't shock me too much, since my parents and TV shows had already shown me that wearing shoes indoors was common in America. But the big surprise came when my friend invited me to his bedroom and then jumped into his bed with his shoes still on. He then pulled me to his sister's room, and there she was, playing in her bed with her shoes on too. I was floored by the whole shoes in bed thing. I still think about it to this day. No offense to people who do this, but it struck me as really strange. To be fair, it's not as bad as people who go barefoot on airplanes and walk into the bathroom. I've heard even flight attendants can't handle that. Story 37. I was meeting my boyfriend's parents for the first time. He had told me they didn't get along, but everything seemed okay until the morning of the second day. We were all getting ready to go out somewhere outdoorsy in the winter. His dad was already dressed and waiting in the foyer, wearing a winter hat with a pom-pom on top. I was standing on the stairs with my boyfriend and his mom, and she was chatting with me warmly. Then, out of nowhere, the dad made a mild comment about us leaving soon. Suddenly, the mom, who had been speaking to me in a normal tone, turned to her husband and shrieked at him at the top of her lungs. I don't even remember what she said, but she seemed murderously angry just because he mentioned we should probably leave soon. The dad's pom-pom shook a little, but he said nothing in response. She turned back to me and rolled her eyes, trying to get me to side with her, as if her husband had done something horribly wrong. I just smiled nervously. Everyone went back to normal after that, as if she hadn't just exploded. I can't imagine how difficult that man's life must have been. Story 38. This is more about something a friend's family didn't do. I had a newer friend in grade 4, and we had hung out a few times. When summer break came around, we got to spend the whole day together doing fun stuff. It came to dinner time, and we had already talked about having a sleepover, so I assumed I was staying the night. But when dinner time came, her mom asked me to call my mom to pick me up. I was confused and asked my friend about it. She said I would go home for dinner and then come back for the sleepover. It felt strange to go home just to eat and then return. Maybe they weren't financially stable, but it was definitely odd. At my house, we always fed my friends dinner and breakfast if they stayed over. I ended up going home for dinner, but I didn't go back after that. Story 39. This wasn't a friend, but a date I went on shortly after I came out. The guy lived in a house on an Air Force base with an engaged couple. One of the guys in the couple was just berating his fiancée. Hardcore emotional abuse. The guy I was on a date with said, "He's like this when he's drunk, just don't say anything." After about 10 minutes, I'd had enough and called the guy out. He started throwing insults at me, but I just shrugged them off and dismissed him. I told my date I wanted to leave, but since I'd been drinking, I was stuck staying the night. It was awkward, and I wasn't in the mood for anything romantic. I woke up, said goodbye, and never saw them again. Story 40. For me, it was the reverse. What my friend saw at my house. My friend, let's call him D, often hung out with me after school. One day, when we were about 9, he wanted to spend the night. Our parents both said it was fine. My mom called us for dinner, and D jumped up, looking really eager. I figured he must have been really hungry. We went to the kitchen, and my mom handed him a plate with some pizza on it. As D turned to sit down, he stumbled and dropped the plate, breaking it. He immediately turned pale and started crying, apologizing over and over, begging us to forgive him. My mom, a little surprised, said, "Oh, don't worry, we'll get you some more." She kept glancing at my dad, and once D sat down, my mom asked my sister to eat in the living room. My parents realized what was happening before I did. Later, we found out that D's dad had been abusing him whenever his mom wasn't around. His dad was good at hiding it, which is why D spent more time at my house than I ever did at his. Story 41. I had a friend with a big family, 6 kids, all with names starting with S. Everyone was super nice, and the father was like the ultimate fun-loving BBQ dad. He wasn't reckless, but he was always in a let's have fun mood. Picture a guy in 80s muscle pants, ready to cannonball into the pool at any moment, with a beer helmet on. Every Halloween, he'd set up a massive display with custom-made figures stuffed with hay. He had about 20 of them creeping around his yard, house, and roof. He'd work on them between playing quarterback and neighborhood street football games. The guy was always in action. One day, my friend and I were hanging out in his driveway, trying to figure out what to do, when his dad came up and handed me a giant novelty cup filled with Coke and ice. I didn't ask for it, but I said thank you and took a sip. I was unsure of what to do with it, so I set it down. Then my friend's dad handed the cup to my friend, who took a sip and passed it back to his dad, who then handed it back to me. We stood there for 10 minutes, passing this giant cup around, taking turns drinking. It wasn't harmful or anything, but I've thought about how weird that was for over 20 years. I've always wondered if it was strange because my family barely talked, or if they were the odd ones for assuming I'd know to pass the cup around. Or maybe we're all just a little weird, and I should stop overthinking it. Story 42. My story is about something that was, in fact, normal, but felt very different to me. I was in foster care for about a year and a half between ages 12 and 13. During that time, I managed to make one good friend. At school, I stood out for being a bit odd and for wearing old, ratty clothes, even though my foster mom wanted to dress me up in pretty and girly outfits. I had a hard time with friends, but me and Dee became pretty close. She lived in my subdivision, so I spent a lot of time at her house. The first time I went over, her parents and older brother were home, and they were so nice. Her dad was fully dressed, not walking around in boxers like my foster family did, and they were kind to one another. They made friendly jokes, but nothing mean, and they didn't shout, slam doors, or yell across the house like I was used to. They had game nights, movie nights, and sometimes we'd just sit and read together in the living room with her parents. It was such a change from what I was used to, and it was really nice. It felt like a whole new experience, one that was actually normal. Story 43. My dad was friends with a man I can only describe as some kind of mad scientist. His entire house was filled with industrial equipment. He didn't have normal furniture, just lawn chairs and stools. The house smelled like oil and burnt metal, and he drank some kind of silver liquid that was turning his skin blue. He had refrigerators full of rock samples and beakers, an incubation chamber with gloves built into the side, centrifuges, and all sorts of things I couldn't name. He said he invented anti-gravity back in the 70s, but the government classified it and ruined him to keep him quiet. He claimed he had even been nominated for a Nobel Prize before they took everything from him. I think he was a material scientist. In his backyard, he had a giant floating disc, like a huge 12-foot hockey puck, with a filthy rubberized exterior. When it wasn't hovering, it weighed a ton, but when he flipped a switch on the control arm, it would float up silently. I saw him move it around his yard and lift it about 20 feet off the ground. I always figured it was some kind of maglev technology, but I've never seen maglev lift anything 2 stories high. He was trying to build a fleet of these discs to fly into the Pentagon, but he couldn't figure out the guidance system. Something about line of sight and sustaining the field. I never really understood what he was talking about. He passed away about 10 years ago, and I've always wondered what happened to that disc. Story 44. This wasn't exactly a friend, but a fellow student. She always had a bit of a messy look. I went over to her and her ex's maisonette. They still lived together even though they had broken up over a year ago. For a project we had to work on. Cat poop. Everywhere. They had one cat in a litter box, but they let the cat poop all over the place and didn't clean it up. As we walked up the stairs, I noticed cat poop in the corners and even smeared across one of the steps. She just stepped over it like it was nothing. When we got to her room, I immediately saw more cat poop on her bed. I asked her why she didn't clean it up, and she said, "I don't have time for that." Coming from a very clean household, all I could think was, "Get out of here." I made up an excuse, said something came up, and left. The next day at college, I told her I was worried about what I saw. I asked when was the last time she cleaned her bed, and she told me her mom came by every couple of months to do the cleaning. I told her it wasn't healthy to live with months-old cat poop in her kitchen and bed, but she didn't care. Other students eventually talked about it behind her back. I avoided her after that because I didn't know how to handle her attitude. Looking back, I think she might have had Diogenes syndrome. Story 45. Our neighbor Ben kept venomous snakes in his house when I was a kid. Lots of snakes, some in buckets, some in cages, and other critters like squirrels too. He would invite us over to show off the things he'd caught in the woods. My dad thought it was cool, so I didn't realize how strange it was. One day, when my dad was at work and my mom was home, Ben came over in a panic. He had been bitten by a diamondback rattlesnake. We all rushed into the car and my mom drove him to the hospital. I'll never forget being in that waiting room. It felt like a scene from a movie. My mom was really upset. And when the doctor came out, the first thing he said was that there was nothing they could do for Ben. My mom went into hysterics until the doctor explained that Ben had been bitten so many times in the past that his body had developed natural anti-venom. He didn't need any treatment. He was fine. Story 46. In 4th grade, the new weird girl in our class invited me to a sleepover in her fancy neighborhood. Coming from a lower middle-class family and being a decently nice kid, I decided to go. While she was giving me a tour of her house, I noticed her bedroom was massive compared to her parents' room, so I asked about it. And she said that since she was an only child, her parents gave her the master bedroom so she could have a big space for her toys. Okay, that made sense. Her room was filled with all kinds of toys. We played with Barbies for a while and then went downstairs while her mom finished dinner. I complimented her mom on how nice their house was and how cool it was that their daughter had such a big room. Her mom casually mentioned that her daughter had thrown a huge tantrum and demanded to switch bedrooms, and they gave in after she made such a fuss. Red flag number 1 noted. Then it was dinner time. Her parents and I sat down at the table, but my new friend ate from a dog bowl on the floor. Confused, I asked some questions. Apparently, she only ate Dinty Moore beef stew at home because her parents refused to buy actual dog food, but she would only eat it from a dog bowl on the floor. The entire dinner, her mom kept begging her to please eat some peas at the table with your friend. She just barked in response. And I guess that was her way of saying no because she never came to the table. After what still stands as the most awkward dinner I've ever had, my friend started bossing me around. She wouldn't let me touch her computer mouse when it was my turn to play with her Barbie makeover game, and she made me just watch while she jumped on the trampoline. We also played with her hamsters, but she insisted I handle them in a very specific way. When I didn't follow her instructions perfectly, she started screaming at me that I was doing it wrong. At that point, as a lone child in a house of chaos, I faked being sick in her ensuite bathroom, told her I was homesick, and called my mom at 2 a.m. to come get me. My mom arrived quickly and took me to the drive-thru at Crystal's, open 24/7, thankfully, where I spilled the entire story of what had happened. Story 47. I was maybe 14, 15, and a friend invited me to his dad's house after school to play some Halo 2 multiplayer. The dad wasn't home, but his girlfriend and her 11-year-old daughter were. After a while, the daughter came and sat next to the chair I was sitting in and started asking me weird questions, eventually asking if I had a girl I liked too, which my friend quipped, "Shut up, leave him alone, we're busy." So I just didn't answer. At some point out of nowhere, she crawls up on top of me and starts giving me a lap dance saying, "Do you like that, Daddy?" and making noises. I don't know what to say or how to react until a moment later my friend asks, "Hey, is she bothering you?" At this point, her face is very close to mine, like she's going to kiss me, and her mother, looking at us, says, "Baby girl, if you're bothering our guest, you need to get down, okay?" I then mutter something like, "Yeah, I'm trying to play a game." So she climbs down, goes in the other room, and me and my friend keep playing Halo like nothing happened, LOL. I haven't spoken to that friend in years, but the one time I asked him about it, he said, "Yeah, she does that. Next time you come over, just push her off if she does it again." I never went back there, LOL. I'm still shaking my head over it. I sometimes wonder what became of that 11-year-old girl, and I really hope she found a better way in life. Story 48. My friend's dad used to smoke in the bathroom, and he'd spend hours in there, which was tough because it was the only bathroom in the apartment. One time he came flying out of there looking super concerned. I was sitting on the couch with one arm on the side and the other on the back of the couch. He rushed toward me and asked, "Lupo, did I step on your hand?" He was dead serious and really worried about it. I just looked at my hands and said, "Nah, you didn't." I joked, "That would have been wild if you had, though." Later that night, he asked us if we had any mushrooms or acid. We obliged since it was his place, and we were selling out of there anyway. He was always drinking coffee brandy and smoking. That night, he smoked some weed with us and sat on an ottoman by the window. For some reason, he leaned back and fell right through the window, taking the curtains down with him. I think the curtains saved him from getting cut since he wasn't wearing a shirt. It was an upstairs apartment, but he landed on the front porch balcony, so it wasn't a huge fall. He was always on some wild stuff, though. He'd come out of the bathroom asking if his hair was on fire or if there were snakes on the back porch. We lived in the middle of town. No snakes for miles, and the back porch was upstairs. I'd be thinking, how do you think snakes could even get up there? I have so many stories about that guy. He used to be really successful before going to prison. He owned a nightclub and sold to some famous people. He had a weekly gig selling 3 giant bags of stuff every week to the same buyer and even had a limo. Then, after prison and his crack days, he moved up to Northern California, got clean, and started eating organic. He raised chickens, grew a garden, and now has dreads down to his knees. You'd never guess he used to live that wild life. Story 49. There was a girl in high school who openly liked me, but I wasn't attracted to her. We had a lot of classes together, so avoiding her was pretty much impossible. She was nice enough, just extremely quirky. One day, she invited me over to hang out at her house. Being young and not wanting to hurt anyone's feelings, I agreed. Everything seemed normal at first. We were just talking in the living room when her younger sister, who I had never met before, she was about 10 years old, walked up to us with a strange, wide-eyed look. She didn't say anything, just stood there. Then out of nowhere, she let out one of the loudest farts I'd ever heard. I was in shock. Normally, I probably would have laughed, but the girl who had invited me over didn't react at all. She was literally in the middle of talking and didn't even acknowledge her sister or what had just happened. Her sister walked off and she kept talking like nothing happened. I couldn't process it. It wasn't just the fart. It was the fact that no one even acknowledged it. I went from finding it hilarious to being seriously weirded out. I politely made my exit as quickly as I could. Story 50. When I was in high school, I spent the night at a friend's house. I was a big midnight snacker back then, so I got up in the middle of the night to find something to eat. I turned on the kitchen light, and to my horror, there were roaches everywhere. Thousands of them crawling all over the dishes from dinner. I was so grossed out that I immediately turned off the light and went back to bed, but I didn't sleep the rest of the night, afraid they'd crawl on me. In the morning, I casually mentioned it to my friend, and he just said, "Yeah, we don't go into the kitchen at night," like it was completely normal. Needless to say, I never went back. As much as my mom used to complain that our house was a mess, it was nothing compared to this. I suddenly understood why she made such a big deal about cleaning, and I've been a neat freak ever since. I absolutely refuse to live with bugs of any kind in my house now. If I even see one or evidence of one, I go into full extermination mode with foggers in every room. Just the thought of that experience still grosses me out today.